The phone wouldn't stop ringing. 18 missed calls from my son Michael, and I just sat there in my kitchen chair, staring at that little screen lighting up over and over again. 2 days ago, he'd looked me straight in the eye and told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner anymore. Said his new wife Jessica thought it would be better for everyone if I stayed home this year. I'd smiled, kissed his cheek like I always did, got in my old blue Honda, and drove the 40 minutes back to my empty house. What Michael didn't know was that I'd been planning something for months, something that would change everything. And now, as my phone buzzed again with his 19th call, I wondered if he'd finally figured out what I'd done. Comment below, as I'd love to hear your thought, and subscribe to the channel to help us hit that big 5,000 subscriber milestone. We're so close, and every single one counts. It's free for you, but it means everything to this channel. And hey, while you're at it, I've left a video and also a link to a playlist on the final screen that I promise will surprise you. Seriously, don't miss them. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Now go hit that button and be part of the journey. Let me start from the beginning, because this story didn't begin 2 days ago when my heart broke in Michael's living room. It started 6 months earlier on a Tuesday morning when I was cleaning out my late husband's desk drawers. My name is Dorothy, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived in the same small town in Ohio my whole life, raised 3 children, and buried a husband I loved for 47 years. My house sits on Maple Street with a front porch where I grow tomatoes every summer and a backyard where my grandchildren used to play before everything changed. The morning that started it all was quiet. Like most of my mornings had become since Henry passed 2 years ago. I was going through his old papers, trying to organize things the way the grief counselor suggested. "One drawer at a time, Dorothy," she'd said. "Don't overwhelm yourself." I pulled out bank statements, old receipts, a few letters from his army days that made me smile through my tears. Then, at the very back of the bottom drawer, my fingers found something I'd never seen before. A thick manila envelope with my name written on it in Henry's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 3 months before he died, and a set of legal papers that made my hands shake as I read them. Henry had been planning something he'd kept secret from everyone, including me. The letter explained everything, and as I read his words, I felt like he was sitting right there beside me, holding my hand the way he used to when he had something important to tell me. "My dearest Dorothy," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling more alone than you ever thought possible. I know our children love you, but I also know how busy life gets, and I worry about you being forgotten in all their rushing around. So I've done something that might surprise you, something I hope will make sure you're never truly alone, and that you always have choices in how you want to live the rest of your beautiful life." The legal papers showed that Henry had been quietly moving money, organizing things, making arrangements I never knew about. He'd been planning for my future in ways that took my breath away. But the most shocking part wasn't the money or the legal documents. It was the last paragraph of his letter. "I've also included some information about our children that I discovered over the years, but never told you about. I kept these secrets because I didn't want to hurt you, but now I think you should know the truth about who they really are. Use this knowledge wisely, my love. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who need to learn the hardest lessons about what family really means." Attached to the letter were 3 separate files, one for each of my children. My hands trembled as I opened Michael's file first. What I found inside made me sit down hard in Henry's old chair, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in the quiet house. For the next 2 hours I read through documents, bank records, and photocopied letters that painted a picture of my son I'd never seen before. Michael, my oldest boy, who everyone thought was so successful with his fancy job and big house, had been stealing from his own company for 3 years. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones. The evidence was all there, carefully collected by Henry, who'd apparently hired a private investigator after he started suspecting something was wrong. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the letters between Michael and his siblings, talking about me like I was already dead, discussing my house, my savings, arguing about who would get what when I finally kicked the bucket. Reading their cold, calculating words about their own mother felt like being punched in the stomach over and over again. Sarah, my middle child, had been telling people I was losing it mentally, so she could start the process of taking over my finances. She'd even contacted a lawyer about getting power of attorney. And David, my baby boy who I'd helped through college, who I'd lent $15,000 to start his business, had been spreading rumors around town that I was becoming a burden and would probably need to go into a nursing home soon. I sat in that chair until the sun went down, reading and rereading those files, trying to understand how the 3 children I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for could have turned into these strangers who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. But Henry, my wise, loving Henry, had given me more than just painful truth. He'd given me power, real power. The legal documents showed that over the years, he'd quietly transferred almost everything we owned into trusts and accounts that only I could access. The house, the savings, even the life insurance money that the kids thought they knew all about. It was all protected in ways they couldn't touch. More than that, Henry had set up what he called my safety net, a series of investments and accounts that would ensure I could live comfortably for the rest of my life, completely independent of my children. But the most brilliant part of his plan was something he called the teaching fund, money specifically set aside to help me teach important lessons to people who needed to learn them. As I closed the files that night, I made a decision that would have shocked the old Dorothy, the one who always tried to keep peace in the family, who always forgave and forgot. I decided that my children needed to learn what it really meant to love and respect the woman who had given them life. Over the next few months, I started paying attention to things I'd been blind to before. The way Michael would roll his eyes when I called. How Sarah would always be too busy to visit, but somehow had time for elaborate vacations she posted about on the social media. The way David would borrow money, but never pay it back, always with some excuse about cash flow. I started planning. Nothing mean or cruel, because despite everything, I still loved them. But I knew they needed to understand that their mother wasn't just some old lady they could push aside when it became convenient. The first part of my plan was simple. I started saying no. When Sarah called asking me to babysit her kids while she went to a spa weekend, I said I had other plans. When David asked for another loan to expand the business, I told him I was being more careful with my money these days. When Michael suggested I should think about selling the house and moving into a retirement community, I just smiled and changed the subject. At first, they thought I was just being difficult. Sarah actually asked if I was feeling okay, said I seemed different lately. But I wasn't different. I was just finally seeing clearly. The second part of my plan took longer to arrange. I started volunteering at the community center, helping with the meals program for families in need. I got to know some wonderful people there, families who were struggling, but who treated each other with such love and kindness that it made my heart ache for what I'd lost with my own children. There was Maria, a single mother with 3 little ones who worked 2 jobs, but still came to volunteer on weekends because she said it was important to give back. There was James, an elderly man whose grown daughter visited him every single day, bringing him lunch and staying to play cards. And there was the Peterson family, who'd lost their home in a fire, but spent their time at the center helping other people instead of feeling sorry for themselves. Being around these people reminded me what real family was supposed to look like. It also gave me an idea for the final part of my plan. 3 weeks before Christmas, I made an appointment with my lawyer and changed my will. Everything I owned would now go to a foundation I was creating to help families in crisis. My children would inherit something, but not what they expected. They would inherit the truth about what their greed and selfishness had cost them. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more lesson to teach, and it required perfect timing. I started dropping little hints about a big Christmas surprise I was planning. Nothing obvious, just little comments here and there when they bothered to call. "Oh, you're going to be so surprised this Christmas," I'd say. "I've been working on something really special for months." I could practically hear the dollar signs in their voices when they asked what I meant, but I just smiled and said they'd have to wait and see. And then came the Tuesday before Christmas when Michael called and asked if I could come over to discuss some important family matters. I knew what was coming, but I went anyway, curious to see how they would do it. Jessica answered the door, barely making eye contact as she let me in. Michael was waiting in the living room with Sarah and David, all of them sitting together on the couch like they were facing a firing squad. The sight of my 3 children united for once might have made me happy if I hadn't known why they were there. "Mom," Michael began, clearing his throat nervously. "We've been talking, and we think it might be better if you spent Christmas at home this year. You know, just to keep things simple." "Simple?" I asked, settling into Henry's old recliner that they'd never bothered to ask if I wanted back after he died. Sarah jumped in, using that fake sweet voice she'd perfected over the years. "We just thought you might be more comfortable in your own space. And honestly, Mom, you've seemed a little confused lately. We're worried about you." David nodded along like a bobblehead. "Plus, Jessica's family is coming and the house will be pretty crowded. We don't want you to feel overwhelmed." I looked at my 3 children, Bibi. These people I'd carried in my body, nursed through sicknesses, cheered for at school plays and graduation ceremonies. I'd taught them to walk, to read, to drive. I'd been there for every heartbreak, every triumph, every moment they'd needed me. And now they were sitting here, lying to my face, trying to push me out of Christmas so they could have their celebration without the burden of including their mother. "I see," I said quietly. "And this is what all 3 of you want?" They exchanged glances, probably surprised I wasn't arguing or crying like they'd expected. "It's just for this year, Mom," Michael said, but I could hear the lie in his voice. This wasn't about one Christmas. This was about them starting to ease me out of their lives completely. I stood up slowly, picked up my purse, and walked to each of them. I kissed Michael's forehead, then Sarah's, then David's, just like I'd done when they were small and I was tucking them into bed. "I understand," I said softly. "You do what you think is best for your family." And then I smiled. Not a sad smile or a hurt smile, but a real, genuine smile that seemed to confuse them all. "I love you all very much," I said. "More than you know. I hope someday you'll understand that everything I've ever done has been because I wanted what was best for you." I walked to the door, turned back once to look at them all sitting there, and added, "Have a wonderful Christmas. I'm sure it will be exactly what you deserve." Then I got in my car and drove home, my heart breaking and mending at the same time, because I knew that in 2 days they were going to learn a lesson about family that they would never forget. The phone rang again, bringing me back to the present moment. 19 missed calls now. Michael's name on the screen, and I could almost picture him pacing around his fancy house, probably surrounded by his siblings, all of them finally realizing that their mother wasn't the helpless old woman they'd thought she was. I reached for the phone, my finger hovering over the answer button. Part of me wondered if I should let them squirm a little longer, but another part of me, the part that was still their mother despite everything, wanted to hear what they had to say. But just as I was about to answer, I heard a car door slam outside, then another, and another. Through my front window, I could see 3 cars parked in my driveway and 3 very familiar figures walking quickly toward my front door, their faces tight with panic and something that looked almost like fear. The doorbell rang 3 times in quick succession, followed by heavy knocking that made my front door shake. I could hear Michael's voice calling through the wood, "Mom! Mom! We know you're in there! Please, we need to talk!" I set my teacup down carefully on the kitchen table and smoothed my dress. Through the lace curtains in my living room, I could see all 3 of my children pacing on my front porch like caged animals. Sarah kept checking her phone. David was running his hands through his hair the way he used to when he was little and had done something wrong, and Michael was doing that thing where he loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves when he was stressed. "Dorothy," Sarah's voice joined in, high and shaky, "please open the door. We just want to make sure you're okay." I almost laughed at that. Now they wanted to make sure I was okay, not 2 days ago when they were kicking me out of Christmas. But now, when whatever they'd discovered had them scared enough to drive across town together. I walked slowly to the front door, my slippers making soft sounds on the hardwood floor Henry and I had refinished together 20 years ago. My hand rested on the doorknob for a moment as I listened to them whispering urgently to each other outside. "Did you try calling the bank again?" That was David's voice. "They won't tell me anything over the phone," Michael replied, sounding frustrated. "They said she has to be there in person." "Well, what about the lawyer?" Sarah asked. "Can't we just—" I opened the door. All 3 of them stopped talking immediately and stared at me. I was dressed in my favorite blue sweater, the one Henry always said brought out my eyes, and I'd put on a little lipstick and fixed my hair nicely. I looked exactly like what I was, a 73-year-old grandmother who'd been having a quiet morning at home. "Hello, children," I said pleasantly, as if they were stopping by for a normal visit. "What a nice surprise. Would you like to come in for coffee?" They looked at each other uncertainly, like they weren't sure if I was serious or if this was some kind of trick. Michael stepped forward first. "Mom, we need to talk. Something's happened, and we're really confused about some things." "Of course, dear." I stepped aside to let them in. "You know you're always welcome here." The irony of those words wasn't lost on any of us, but I said them with such genuine warmth that it seemed to throw them off balance even more. They followed me into the living room, and I noticed how they all looked around like they were seeing the place for the first time. Maybe they were. When was the last time any of them had really spent time here, really sat and talked with me in the home where they'd grown up? "Please, sit wherever you'd like," I said, settling into my favorite armchair. "I was just having some tea. Are you sure I can't get you anything?" "Mom," Sarah said, perching nervously on the edge of the couch. "We went to the bank today." "Did you? That's nice, dear. I hope Mary Henderson helped you. She's always been so sweet to me there." David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Mom, they told us some things that don't make sense. About your accounts. About money that we thought—" He trailed off, clearly not knowing how to finish that sentence without admitting they'd been counting on inheriting money that apparently wasn't there anymore. Michael cleared his throat. "The thing is, Mom, we're worried that maybe someone has taken advantage of you. You know, scammed you somehow, because the numbers we're hearing don't match what we expected." I tilted my head to the side, looking at him with the same expression I used to give him when he was 7, and trying to convince me he hadn't eaten the cookies I'd made for the church bake sale. "What numbers were you expecting, Michael?" The question hung in the air like smoke. None of them wanted to answer it because doing so would mean admitting they'd been planning for my death, counting my money before I was gone. Sarah tried a different approach. "We're just concerned because you've been acting differently lately, more secretive. And now we find out you've been moving money around and making changes to things without telling us." "Changes to what things?" "Sweetheart? You know what things." David said, a little more sharply than he probably intended. Your will? Your accounts? The house? I nodded slowly, as if I was just understanding their concern for the first time. Oh, I see. You're worried because I've been making decisions about my own money and my own property without asking permission from my children first. That's not what we meant, Michael said quickly, but his face had turned red the way it always did when he knew he was caught. Then what did you mean? They looked at each other again, having one of those silent conversations that families have when they're trying to figure out who's going to say the thing nobody wants to say. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath. Mom, we know about the foundation. Which foundation is that? The one you set up, the Dorothy and Henry Morrison Foundation for Families in Crisis. She said the name like it tasted bitter. The one that's apparently getting everything. I smiled, thinking about Henry and how proud he would be that his plan was working exactly as he'd hoped. Oh, that foundation, yes, I'm very excited about it. I've been working with some wonderful people at the community center, and we've identified so many families who could use help. Did you know that there are children right here in our town who don't have warm coats for winter, and families who can't afford Christmas presents for their little ones? Mom, Michael interrupted, that's very nice, but we need to talk about what this means for the family. Which family? The families I'm helping through the foundation? Our family, David burst out. Your family, your children. His voice echoed in the quiet room, and I could see immediately that he regretted the outburst. But it was too late. The mask had slipped, and now we were getting to the real reason for this visit. I set down my teacup and folded my hands in my lap. When I spoke, my voice was still gentle, but there was something underneath it now that made all three of them sit up straighter. David, honey, I need you to help me understand something. Are you upset because you think I'm being taken advantage of? Or are you upset because you've realized that you're not going to inherit as much money as you thought you would? The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. Because if it's the first thing, I continued, then I appreciate your concern, and I can show you all the paperwork proving that every decision I've made has been carefully considered with the help of lawyers and financial advisors. But if it's the second thing, I let the sentence hang there, watching their faces. Sarah tried to recover first. Of course we're not upset about money, Mom. We're upset because we're afraid someone is manipulating you. Someone like who? We don't know, Michael said. That's what we're trying to figure out. Who helped you set up this foundation? Who's been advising you? I almost told them the truth right then, that their own father had set this all in motion, that Henry had known exactly what kind of people they'd become and had planned accordingly. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way they were all looking at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than their mother. Maybe it was the memory of how quickly they'd dismissed me from Christmas. Or maybe it was just that I wasn't quite ready for this lesson to be over. I've been getting advice from several people, I said instead. My lawyer, my financial advisor, some friends from church, people who care about me and want what's best for me. What friends from church? Sarah demanded. I thought you stopped going to church after Dad died. That was true. I had stopped going to our old church, mostly because every Sunday I'd sit in the pew where Henry and I had sat for 40 years, and the emptiness beside me felt like a physical pain. But about 6 months ago, I'd started attending a smaller church closer to the community center, where the pastor talked more about helping people and less about judging them. I've been going to Grace Community Church, I said. Pastor Williams has been very helpful in thinking through how to use our blessings to help others. Pastor Williams? Michael's voice had an edge to it now. Mom, you barely know these people, and now you're letting them influence major financial decisions? Michael, I've been making my own decisions for 73 years. I think I can manage to continue doing so without supervision from my children. The words came out more sharply than I'd intended, but I was starting to feel the old frustration building up. Even now, even when they were the ones who needed something from me, they couldn't manage to treat me like a competent adult. David stood up abruptly and started pacing. "This is crazy. 6 months ago, everything was normal. You were just Mom. And now suddenly you're setting up foundations and moving money around and making all these changes, and you're acting like we don't have any right to be concerned. 6 months ago, what was I, David?" He stopped pacing and looked at me. "What do you mean?" "You said 6 months ago I was just Mom. What did that mean to you? What was I?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly realizing this was some kind of trap, but not sure how to avoid it. You were yourself." "Which was what?" "Exactly." Sarah jumped in to help him. You were our mother. You were there when we needed you. You were available." "Available?" I repeated the word slowly. "Like a service that was always ready when you needed it." "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" I stood up and walked to the mantel where Henry and I had displayed family photos for decades. Pictures of birthdays and graduations and weddings. Pictures of grandchildren I rarely saw anymore. Pictures of a family that had once been real. I picked up a photo from Michael's wedding day. In it, I was straightening his tie while he smiled down at me. And you could see the love between us so clearly, it made my heart ache. "Michael," I said softly, "do you remember what you said to me at your wedding?" He looked uncomfortable. "Mom, that was 8 years ago. You said that no matter what happened, no matter how old you got or how successful you became, I would always be the most important woman in your life. You said you'd never let anyone come between us." I set the photo back down and turned to face him. "Where is that man who made me that promise?" Michael's face crumpled a little, and for a moment I saw my boy in there. The one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I was the bravest person in the world. "I'm still here, Mom. I'm still that person." "Are you?" "Because that person wouldn't have let his wife convince him to uninvite his mother from Christmas." "Jessica didn't," he started, but I held up a hand. "Michael, I've been married. I know how these conversations go. Jessica didn't put a gun to your head and force you to hurt me. You made a choice. You chose her comfort over my feelings, and you tried to make me believe it was for my own good." Sarah stood up now, too. "Mom, you're being unfair. Marriage is complicated, and sometimes you have to make difficult choices." "Yes, it is complicated. Your father and I were married for 47 years, so I understand complicated. But do you know what we never did? We never threw either of our mothers away, like yesterday's newspaper, just because it was more convenient." "Nobody threw you away," David protested. "Didn't you?" I walked back to my chair and sat down, suddenly feeling very tired. "When was the last time any of you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask me to babysit or to borrow money or to tell me what I should do with my house, but just to talk to me because you missed me?" The silence stretched out again, and I could see them all trying to remember. "When was the last time any of you invited me to dinner? Not on a holiday when you felt obligated, but just because you wanted my company?" More silence. "When was the last time any of you asked me about my life? My friends, my interests, my thoughts about anything, other than whether I was taking my medications or if I needed help around the house?" Sarah's eyes were filling with tears now. "Mom, we've been busy. We have jobs and kids and I understand that," I said gently. "I really do. Life gets overwhelming, and it's easy to take the people who love us for granted. But busy is one thing. What happened 2 days ago was something else entirely." I stood up again and walked to the window, looking out at the street where they'd all learned to ride bikes, where they'd played with neighborhood children who had grown up and moved away or stayed and started families of their own. "Do you want to know what I've been doing for the past 6 months?" I asked without turning around. I've been volunteering at the community center, helping families who are struggling. And do you know what I've learned? I turned back to face them. I've learned that there are people in this world who have very little money, but who are rich in the things that really matter. I've met mothers who work 3 jobs but still find time to help their neighbors. I've met children who share their last piece of candy with someone who's hungry. I've met families who have lost everything, but who still treat each other with kindness and respect. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom, what does this have to do with— It has everything to do with it, I interrupted. Because being around those people reminded me what I used to think my own family was like. It reminded me of the children I raised, who I thought understood that love isn't something you turn on and off when it's convenient. I sat back down and looked at each of them in turn. So, yes, I've been making changes. I've been thinking about what kind of legacy I want to leave and what kind of impact I want my life to have had. And I've decided that instead of leaving money to people who already have enough but still want more, I'd rather help people who have nothing but still find ways to give to others. David's face had gone very pale. But Mom, we're your children. Doesn't that count for something? Of course it does, eh? It counts for everything. That's exactly why I'm doing this. I don't understand. I leaned forward, my voice becoming very serious. David, if I died tomorrow and left each of you $1 million, what would change in your life? He thought for a moment. Well, I could expand the business, maybe buy a bigger house. But would you be happier? Would you be a better person? Would you treat the people you love with more kindness? I don't know. I do know, I said firmly. You'd be the same person you are right now, just with more money. Money doesn't fix character problems, sweetheart. It just makes them more expensive. Sarah was crying openly now. So you're punishing us? No, honey. I'm trying to save you. I got up and went to her, kneeling down beside the couch the way I used to when she was little, and had scraped her knee or had her feelings hurt at school. I took her hands in mine. Sarah, do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted that expensive bike for your birthday? She nodded, wiping her eyes. And your father and I told you that you could have it, but only if you earned half the money yourself? Yes. Do you remember how angry you were? How you said we were being mean and that all your friends' parents just bought them whatever they wanted? Yes. And do you remember how proud you were when you finally saved up enough money from babysitting and doing extra chores and we went to buy that bike together? A small smile broke through her tears. It was the most beautiful bike I'd ever seen. And you took better care of it than any toy you'd ever owned, because you'd worked for it, because it meant something more than just another thing your parents gave you. I squeezed her hands gently. That's what I'm trying to do now, sweetheart. I'm trying to give you something more valuable than money. I'm trying to give you a chance to remember who you really are underneath all this worry about what you're going to inherit. Michael spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. But Mom, we need to know that you're going to be okay. We need to know that you're not going to end up with nothing. I looked at him with surprise. Michael, what makes you think I'm going to end up with nothing? Well, if you're giving everything away to this foundation, who told you I was giving everything away? They looked at each other confused. The bank, Sarah said slowly. They said the foundation was getting the bulk of the estate. The bulk, yes, but not everything. I smiled. Did you really think your mother was stupid enough to leave herself with nothing to live on? The relief on their faces was so obvious it would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. They weren't worried about me ending up destitute. They were worried about their inheritance disappearing completely. So we're still, David started, then caught himself. Still getting something? I finished for him. Yes, you're still getting something, just not what you expected. Michael leaned forward eagerly. "What are we getting?" I stood up and walked back to the mantel, picking up another photo. This one was of all of us at David's high school graduation. We looked so happy, so connected, like a real family. "You're getting a chance," I said without turning around. "A chance to show me that the children I raised are still in there somewhere. A chance to prove that family means more to you than money." I turned back to them, and when I spoke again, my voice was steady and clear. "Here's what's going to happen. The foundation will indeed get the majority of my estate when I die. But there's a provision in my will that can change that. A way for you to inherit what you were expecting, and more." All three of them were hanging on every word now. "The provision requires you to demonstrate over the next year that you understand what it means to be a family, that you can put love and caring ahead of convenience and greed." "What kind of demonstration?" Sarah asked. "That's for me to decide as situations arise, but I'll give you a hint. It won't involve money. It will involve time, attention, kindness, and genuine care for your mother." David stood up, his face flushed with anger. "So this is blackmail. You're bribing us to love you." His words hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the back of my chair to steady myself. "David," I said quietly, "I can't bribe someone to love me. Love can't be bought, but I can give you opportunities to remember how to show love, if it's still there to be shown." "And if we refuse?" Michael asked. "Then you'll inherit exactly what your behavior has earned you, a small token amount, and the knowledge that you chose pride over relationship." I walked to the front door and opened it. "I think that's enough for today. You have a lot to think about." They all stood up slowly, clearly not wanting to leave without more answers. Sarah stopped in front of me. "Mom, I'm sorry about Christmas. I really am. We made a mistake." "Yes, you did. But mistakes can be fixed if people are willing to do the work." She hugged me then, and for a moment it felt like my daughter again instead of a stranger worried about money. Michael and David followed her to the door, both looking uncertain and confused. As Michael stepped onto the porch, he turned back. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Who helped you plan all this? Because this is really sophisticated. The foundation, the legal work, the provisions in the will, this isn't something you could have figured out on your own." I smiled, thinking about Henry and his careful planning, his love that reached beyond death to protect me and teach our children important lessons. "Someone who loved me very much," I said. "Someone who knew our family better than we knew ourselves." And then I closed the door, leaving them standing on the porch with more questions than answers, which was exactly where they needed to be. But as I watched them through the window, walking slowly back to their cars with their heads together in intense conversation, I realized that something had shifted today. They'd looked at me differently during our conversation. Not like a problem to be managed or an obligation to be handled, but like a person with thoughts and feelings and the right to make her own decisions. It was a start. But as I saw Michael pull out his phone and start making what looked like a very intense call, I had a feeling that the real test was just beginning. I was washing dishes from my simple dinner when I heard the car pull into my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see headlights cutting through the darkness, and my heart sank a little when I recognized the expensive silver sedan, Jessica's car. It was nearly 8 o'clock at night, 3 days after my children's surprise visit, and I'd been hoping for a quiet evening to process everything that had happened. But apparently, the family drama wasn't finished with me yet. The car door slammed with more force than necessary, and I could see Jessica's silhouette marching up my front walkway like a woman on a mission. Her heels clicked sharply against the concrete, each step sounding like a small explosion in the quiet evening air. The doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, followed immediately by sharp knocking. "Dorothy!" Jessica's voice called through the door. high and tight with barely controlled anger. "I know you're in there. We need to talk right now." I dried my hand slowly on the dish towel, taking my time. Whatever Jessica had come to say, I had a feeling it wasn't going to be pleasant, and I wanted to be as calm as possible for whatever storm was about to break. When I opened the door, Jessica pushed past me into the living room without waiting to be invited in. She was dressed in one of her expensive business suits, her makeup perfect even at this hour, her blonde hair pulled back in the severe style she wore when she meant business. "Hello, Jessica," I said pleasantly, closing the door behind her. "This is a surprise. Would you like some coffee?" She spun around to face me, her eyes blazing with fury. "Cut the sweet grandmother act, Dorothy. We both know what you're really doing here." "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, dear." "Don't you dare dear me!" Jessica's voice rose, and I was grateful that my neighbors' houses were far enough away that they wouldn't be disturbed. "You know exactly what you're doing, and I'm here to tell you it stops now." I settled into my favorite chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Why don't you tell me what's upset you? And maybe I can help you understand the situation better." Jessica began pacing back and forth across my living room like a caged animal, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "What's upset me? What's upset me is that my husband has been walking around our house for 3 days like a zombie, barely eating, barely sleeping, obsessing over some ridiculous test you've decided to put him through." "I haven't put anyone through any test, Jessica. I've simply made some decisions about my own life and my own money." "Your own money?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Dorothy, let's be honest here. You wouldn't have any money if it wasn't for Henry's life insurance and his pension. And now, you're using that money to manipulate your own children like they're puppets on strings." The mention of Henry's name in that contemptuous tone made my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "Henry worked very hard his entire life to make sure I would be comfortable after he was gone. He would be proud of how I'm using the security he provided. He would be proud." Jessica stopped pacing and stared at me. "Dorothy, say Henry would be horrified if he knew you were threatening to disinherit his children over some petty grievance about Christmas dinner." "You think this is about Christmas dinner?" "Of course it's about Christmas dinner. Michael tells me he's invited you over a dozen times to make up for that, but you keep refusing. You're punishing us because your feelings got hurt, and now you're using your will as a weapon." I looked at this woman who had married my son 8 years ago, who had slowly but surely created distance between Michael and his family, who had convinced him that his mother was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person to be loved. "Jessica," I said quietly, "when was the last time you asked Michael to invite me to your house for dinner? Not for a holiday, not because you felt obligated, but because you genuinely wanted my company." "That's not the point, isn't it? When was the last time you encouraged Michael to call me just to check in? When was the last time you suggested that maybe I'd like to spend time with my grandchildren?" Jessica's face flushed red. "I don't have to encourage Michael to have a relationship with his mother. That's his responsibility." "You're right. It is his responsibility, but you've made it very difficult for him to fulfill that responsibility, haven't you?" "I have never told Michael he couldn't see you." "No, you've just made it clear that including me in your lives was a burden. You've rolled your eyes when he mentioned visiting me. You've scheduled family activities on days when he usually called me. You've made little comments about how I'm getting older and might be confused whenever he showed any independence from your opinions." Jessica opened her mouth to deny it, but I held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You've also spent the last 3 years hinting to Michael that I should sell this house and move into a retirement community. You've suggested that maybe I'm not capable of managing my own finances, and you've made sure that your children barely know their grandmother by finding excuses every time I've asked to see them." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When was the last time Emma or Jake spent the night here? When was the last time I was invited to one of their school plays or soccer games? When was the last time you brought them over just to visit with their grandmother?" Jessica's composure was starting to crack. We're very busy people Dorothy. We have careers, we have social obligations. You have time for what you prioritize, I interrupted. And clearly, maintaining a relationship between my grandchildren and their grandmother has never been a priority for you. She stared at me for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with angry breaths. Then she seemed to regroup, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin. Fine, she said coldly. Let's say you're right about everything. Let's say I haven't been the perfect daughter-in-law. Does that really justify what you're doing now? Does it justify threatening to leave everything to strangers instead of to your own family? The families I'm helping through the foundation aren't strangers to me, Jessica. I know them. I've spent time with them. I've seen how they treat each other, how they sacrifice for each other, how they love each other even when they don't have much else. So, this is about showing us up? About proving that other people are better than we are? No, this is about remembering what family is supposed to look like. Jessica laughed again, but there was no humor in it. Family is supposed to look like manipulation and blackmail? Because that's what this is, Dorothy. You're holding money over our heads to force us to pretend to care about you. Her words stung because there was a grain of truth in them, but not in the way she meant it. Jessica, if spending time with me feels like such a burden that you consider it blackmail, then maybe that tells us everything we need to know about where things stand. Don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything. You came to my house on a Thursday night to yell at me about my own personal financial decisions. You're angry because those decisions might affect how much money you and Michael inherit when I die. And you're calling me manipulative. Jessica began pacing again, her movements sharp and agitated. This isn't just about money, and you know it. This is about security. This is about planning for the future. Michael and I have worked hard to build a good life, and we've made financial decisions based on certain expectations. What kind of expectations? You know what kind. We bought our house assuming that someday we'd inherit this one and could sell it. We've made investments and planned for retirement based on what we thought would be coming to us. I felt a cold anger building in my chest. So, you've been planning for my death. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You've been making financial decisions based on money that doesn't belong to you yet. Money that you would only get if I died. Jessica stopped pacing and faced me directly. Dorothy, everyone does that. Everyone plans for inheritance. That's normal. What's normal is hoping your parents live long, healthy lives and worrying about taking care of them as they age. What's not normal is buying houses and making investments based on money you'll only get when they're dead. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Tell me, Jessica, have you and Michael ever discussed what you would do if I needed long-term care? Have you talked about how you'd help me if I couldn't live independently anymore? Or have you only talked about what you'd do with my money after I'm gone? The silence that followed was answer enough. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Michael had learned to ride his bike, where he'd played catch with his father, where he'd brought Jessica to meet me for the first time all those years ago. You know, I said softly, when Michael first brought you home to meet us, I was so happy. He was so in love and so excited about his future with you. And you seemed lovely, smart, ambitious, full of life. Dorothy, I remember thinking that I was gaining a daughter, not losing a son. I imagined holidays with grandchildren, family vacations, Sunday dinners, where we'd all laugh and share stories. I thought you'd become part of our family. I turned back to face her. But that's not what happened, is it? Instead of gaining a daughter, I lost a son, because you didn't want to become part of our family. You wanted Michael to become part of yours, and there wasn't room for his old family in that picture. Jessica's face had gone very pale. That's not fair, isn't it? Your parents live 2 hours away, but we see them at every family gathering. Your sister and her children are always welcome at your house. You make time for your old college friends, your book club, your tennis partners. But somehow, there's never time for Michael's family. Michael's family is difficult, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. How are we difficult? You're needy. You want too much attention. You guilt him when he can't visit as often as you'd like. You make him feel bad for having his own life. I stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time how she'd poisoned my son's mind against me over the years. Jessica, I called Michael once a week. Once a week I would call my son to hear his voice and find out how he was doing. Is that needy? You called more than that. When? When did I call more than once a week? She couldn't answer because it wasn't true. And when I called, did I ask him for money? Did I ask him to come fix things around the house? Did I ask him to take me places or do favors for me? No, but I called to hear about his work, his life, his children. I called because I loved him and missed him. How is that needy? Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. Tears started streaming down her face and her voice became high and desperate. Because it made him feel guilty. Every time he got off the phone with you, he'd be sad for the rest of the day. He'd talk about how lonely you sounded, how he should visit more, how he should call more. It was like you had this hold over him that I couldn't compete with. And there it was, the truth finally. So you decided to help him break free from that hold. I decided to help him build a life that wasn't ruled by guilt and obligation. And in the process, you convinced him that loving his mother was a weakness. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her perfect makeup. That's not what I did. That's exactly what you did. You made him choose between his mother and his wife, and you made sure he knew which choice would make his life easier. I sat back down and looked at this woman who had been part of my family for 8 years, but had never really been family at all. Jessica, I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine that Emma is 35 years old and married. Imagine that her husband slowly convinces her that calling you once a week is needy. That visiting you for holidays is an obligation she should be freed from. That including you in her life makes her weak. Jessica's crying got harder. Imagine that Emma stops calling, stops visiting, stops including you in her children's lives. And when you finally get invited to Christmas dinner, her husband finds an excuse to uninvite you because it's more convenient not to have you there. Stop, Jessica whispered. How would that feel, Jessica? How would it feel to lose your daughter to someone who saw you as competition instead of family? Jessica sank down onto the couch, her head in her hands. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted him to love me most. Oh, honey. I got up and sat beside her, putting my arm around her shoulders, the way I would have if she really were my daughter. Love isn't pie. There's not a limited amount that gets used up if you share it. Michael loving me doesn't mean he loves you less. She leaned into me then, crying like a child, and for the first time since she'd entered my house, I saw the scared, insecure woman underneath all that anger and control. I thought if he loved you too much, he'd leave me, she sobbed. My father left my mother for his secretary when I was 12. He said Mom had gotten boring, that she didn't understand him anymore. I was so afraid that if Michael stayed too close to his family, he'd realize I wasn't enough. Jessica, your father left because he was selfish and weak. That has nothing to do with Michael. But what if it does? What if he wakes up one day and decides he made a mistake marrying me? I held her while she cried. This woman who had caused me so much pain, but who was clearly carrying around pain of her own. Jessica, do you want to know a secret about love? She nodded against my shoulder. The more you try to control it, the more likely you are to lose it. If you had encouraged Michael's relationship with his family, if you had welcomed us into your life, instead of seeing us as threats, you would have had a husband who felt free to love you completely, instead of one who feels guilty and conflicted. She pulled back and looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Is it too late? Have I ruined everything? Before I could answer, we heard a car door slam outside. Through the window I could see Michael's truck in the driveway, and he was walking quickly toward the house, his face tight with worry. "Jessica!" he called as he knocked on the door. "Jessica, your car's here. Are you okay?" I got up to let him in, and he rushed past me to where Jessica sat crying on the couch. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling down beside her and taking her hands. "Did something happen to the kids? Are you hurt?" "I came to talk to your mother," Jessica said through her tears. "I came to tell her she was being unfair, but I think I'm the one who's been unfair." Michael looked confused, his eyes moving between Jessica and me. "What are you talking about?" Jessica took a shaky breath. "Michael, I need to tell you something, and you're going to be angry with me." "Jessica, what? I've been jealous of your mother for years. I've been scared that if you loved her too much, you wouldn't love me enough. So I've been pushing you away from her without you realizing it." Michael's face went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean that every time you wanted to visit her, I found reasons why we couldn't. Every time you wanted to invite her over, I complained about how much work it would be. I made little comments about her being lonely or needy or getting older, and I did it to make you feel like including her in our lives was a burden instead of a joy." Michael stood up slowly, his face pale. "Jessica, I know you love me, Michael. I know you chose me and married me and built a life with me. But I was so scared of losing you that I convinced you to push away the woman who raised you, who loved you first, who would never hurt you the way my father hurt my mother." Michael looked at me, and I could see the pieces falling into place in his mind. All the times over the years when he'd started to suggest visiting me or calling me, and Jessica had redirected the conversation. All the times he'd felt guilty about not being a better son, but somehow never managed to follow through on changing that. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry." "I know you are, sweetheart. I should have seen it. I should have realized what was happening. You loved your wife, and you trusted her to want what was best for your family. That's not something to apologize for." Jessica stood up and walked over to us. "Dorothy, I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. But I want to try to make this right, if you'll let me." I looked at this woman who had been my enemy without me even knowing it, who had stolen years of relationship with my son, who had kept my grandchildren away from me. And I saw something in her face that gave me hope, genuine remorse, and a desire to change. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to learn how to be part of your family instead of competing with it. I want Emma and Jake to know their grandmother. I want to stop being afraid of sharing Michael's love." Michael put his arm around Jessica and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, if you'll give us another chance, I promise things will be different." I studied both of their faces, seeing sincerity there, but also knowing that promises made in emotional moments aren't always kept when life gets busy again. "I believe that you both mean what you're saying right now," I said carefully. "But intentions and actions are two different things. If you really want things to change, you're going to have to prove it through your choices, not your words." "How?" Jessica asked. "What do we need to do?" I walked back to the mantel and picked up a photo of Emma and Jake from last Christmas. A photo that Jessica had texted to me instead of inviting me to be there when it was taken. "I want to know my grandchildren," I said simply. "Really know them. I want to be part of their lives, not just someone they see at holidays. I want to hear about their friends, their fears, their dreams. I want them to feel comfortable coming to me when they need someone to talk to." "Done," Michael said immediately. "I want you to include me in family decisions, not financial decisions. Those are mine to make. But if you're planning a vacation or thinking about changing schools or dealing with a problem with the kids. I want to be someone you talk to about it." "Of course," Jessica said, nodding eagerly. "And I want you both to understand that rebuilding trust, it takes time. One conversation doesn't erase years of feeling shut out and forgotten. You're going to have to be patient with me as I learn to believe that this change is real." They both nodded, and for a moment we all stood there in the quiet living room, the weight of years of misunderstandings and hurt feelings settling around us like dust. Then Michael stepped forward and hugged me, and it felt different from the perfunctory hugs I'd gotten used to over the years. It felt like my son holding his mother, not like an obligation being fulfilled. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "I never stopped loving you, even when I was being an idiot." "I love you too, sweetheart. I always have, and I always will." Jessica joined the hug then, and though it felt awkward at first, there was something real in it, something that might, with time and effort, grow into genuine affection. When we pulled apart, Jessica wiped her eyes and tried to fix her smeared makeup. "I should get home to the kids, but Dorothy, would you like to come to dinner this weekend? I could make that roast you brought to our house years ago, the one Michael always talks about." "I'd like that very much." As they prepared to leave, Michael turned back to me. "Mom, about the will and the foundation and everything, we don't need to talk about that tonight, Michael. But I want you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. And I want you to know that even if you left everything to charity, I'd still want to rebuild our relationship. This isn't about money anymore." "I'm glad to hear that, sweetheart. Because the best inheritance I can give any of you isn't money. It's the knowledge that you're loved and that you know how to love others in return." After they left, I sat in my quiet house thinking about the evening's revelations. Jessica's confession had answered so many questions about why Michael had gradually pulled away over the years. But it had also given me something I hadn't expected: hope that the damage could be repaired. I was getting ready for bed when the phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and I answered on the second ring. "Mom," she said, her voice shaky. "I just got off the phone with Michael. He told me about Jessica's visit, about what she said." "Did he?" "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course, sweetheart. Have I been like Jessica? Have I been pushing you away without realizing it?" I sat down heavily in my bedroom chair looking at a photo of Sarah on her wedding day, radiant and beautiful, and so full of hope. "Sarah, honey, do you really want me to answer that question?" The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Tomorrow was going to bring another difficult conversation, another chance for healing or for deeper wounds. But tonight, I was hopeful in a way I hadn't been in years, because sometimes the most unexpected confrontations led to the most important breakthroughs. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who are hurting the most themselves. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I thought about Henry and how proud he would be that his plan was working. Not just the financial aspects, but the deeper goal of teaching our children what really mattered in life. But I also knew that the hardest tests were still ahead. Jessica's confession was just the beginning. Now came the much more difficult work of rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by years of neglect and misunderstanding. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow was going to bring another surprise that would test just how serious my children were about changing their priorities. The next morning brought a surprise I never could have predicted. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee and the morning paper when I heard not one, but 3 cars pulling into my driveway at the same time. Through the window, I could see Michael's truck, Sarah's SUV, and David's sedan, all parked side by side, like they'd planned some kind of coordinated attack. But when they got out of their cars, something was different. Instead of the tense, worried expressions they'd worn during their last visit. They all looked determined, purposeful. And they were carrying things: flowers, grocery bags, what looked like cleaning supplies. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, all three of my children stood there with nervous smiles. "Good morning, Mom," Sarah said, holding up a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorite. "We were wondering if you had any plans today." "I was just having my coffee and reading the paper," I said, genuinely confused. "What's all this?" David stepped forward, shifting a toolbox from one hand to the other. "Mom, we've been talking all night. Michael told us about his conversation with Jessica, and it made us realize some things about ourselves." "What kind of things?" Michael cleared his throat. "We realized that we've been so focused on what we thought we deserved from you that we never stopped to think about what you deserved from us." Sarah nodded eagerly. "So we decided to stop talking about being better children and start actually being better children." "Today?" I asked, still not understanding. "Today," David confirmed. "We cleared our schedules. We arranged childcare. We canceled meetings because our mother is more important than any of those things. And it's about time we proved it." I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I looked at these three adults who had somehow found their way back to being my children again. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Sarah grinned, and for a moment she looked exactly like she had when she was 12, and planning some elaborate surprise. "We're going to spend the day taking care of you the way you took care of us for all those years. And we're going to start by making you that breakfast you used to make for us every Saturday morning," Michael added, holding up a grocery bag. "Pancakes with blueberries, turkey bacon, and fresh orange juice. You remember that?" "Mom," David said softly, "we remember everything. We just forgot to show you that we remembered." They bustled into my house like a small tornado of activity. Sarah immediately began arranging the roses in my favorite vase, the crystal one Henry had given me for our 20th anniversary. Michael headed to the kitchen and started unpacking groceries, pulling out ingredients for what looked like a feast rather than just breakfast. David disappeared into the living room with his toolbox, muttering something about the squeaky hinge on my front closet that had been bothering me for months. "Wait! Wait!" I called out, overwhelmed by the sudden activity. "You don't need to do all this." "Yes, we do," Sarah said firmly, coming back from the dining room where she'd placed the flowers. "Mom, when was the last time someone took care of you?" The question stopped me cold because I couldn't remember. Since Henry died, I'd been taking care of everything myself, managing my own life, solving my own problems, making my own decisions. The idea that someone might want to take care of me felt almost foreign. "I don't need taking care of," I said automatically. "Everyone needs taking care of sometimes," Michael said from the kitchen, where he was already measuring flour. "You spent 30 years taking care of us. It's our turn." David poked his head out of the closet. "Mom, this hinge isn't just squeaky. It's about to fall off completely. When did this happen?" "Oh, about 6 months ago. I've been meaning to call someone to fix it." "Why didn't you call one of us?" The question hung in the air, and we all knew the answer. Because over the years, they'd made it clear that they were too busy for small requests like that. Because I'd learned not to bother them with things I could handle myself, or simply live with. "From now on," David said quietly, "you call us first. Before you call a repairman, before you try to fix things yourself, before you just decide to live with problems that we could easily solve. Deal?" "Deal," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. As the morning progressed, my house filled with sounds it hadn't heard in years. Laughter, conversation, the clatter of dishes, the happy chaos of a family working together. Michael cooked breakfast while humming off key, the same way he'd done as a teenager. Sarah reorganized my spice cabinet, talking non-stop about her kids and asking my advice about problems at work. David fixed not just the closet hinge, but 3 other small issues around the house that I hadn't even mentioned. When we finally sat down to eat, the kitchen table groaned under the weight of pancakes, bacon, eggs, fresh fruit, and pastries that Michael had apparently picked up from the bakery I'd mentioned loving years ago. "This is too much food for 4 people," I said, laughing. "5 people," Sarah corrected. "Jessica's coming over after she drops the kids at school. She wanted to apologize to all of us, not just you." "And 6 people, actually," David added. "I invited Rebecca. I hope that's okay. I realized last night that you've never really gotten to know my wife. Because I've been keeping my family life and my mother life completely separate, like they couldn't coexist." "7 people," Michael said with a grin. "Emma and Jake are coming after school. Jessica thought it was time they spent some real time with their grandmother." I put down my fork and looked around the table at my 3 children, all of them watching me with hopeful, nervous expressions. "You planned all this last night?" "We stayed up until 3 in the morning," Sarah admitted. "At first, we were just talking about what Jessica had said, but then we started really talking about our childhoods, about how you used to make everything special for us. And we realized that we've been so busy being adults that we forgot how to be your children." Michael reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I want to tell you something that I should have said years ago. You were the best mother any of us could have asked for. You made us feel loved and safe and important every single day of our childhood. And somehow, as adults, we started taking that for granted instead of being grateful for it." "You sacrificed so much for us," David added. "You worked part-time jobs around our school schedules so you could be home when we got off the bus. You drove us to practices and lessons and friends' houses without ever complaining. You sat up with us when we were sick, helped us with homework you didn't understand, listened to our problems like they were the most important things in the world." Sarah's eyes were filled with tears. "And you did it all, while managing a household and supporting Dad and somehow still finding time to volunteer at our schools and coach our teams and make Halloween costumes and birthday cakes and Christmas magic." "You gave us the most wonderful childhood," Michael said, "and we repaid you by growing up and forgetting to include you in our adult lives." I was crying now, overwhelmed by hearing my children, my grown, successful children, fatata, acknowledge the sacrifices I'd made and the love I'd given. "I didn't do those things for gratitude, Cha," I managed to say. "I did them because I loved you." "We know," Sarah said softly. "And that makes our behavior even worse. Because you loved us unconditionally and we started putting conditions on our love for you. We started treating you like an obligation instead of a privilege." David set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me. "Mom, I need to tell you something else. Yesterday after we left here, I went home and really thought about what you'd said about family. And I realized that I've been treating you the way I would never want my own children to treat me when they grow up." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if my kids grew up and only called me when they needed something, if they only invited me to their lives when it was convenient, if they talked about me like I was a burden they had to manage, it would break my heart." Michael nodded. "And the worst part is, we didn't even realize we were doing it. We convinced ourselves that we were busy, that we had our own lives to live, that you understood and didn't mind." "But you did mind," Sarah said. "You minded so much that you changed your will and set up a foundation and created a test for us to pass. And instead of being angry about that, we should be grateful that you cared enough about us to give us a chance to remember who we're supposed to be." I looked around the table at these 3 people who had once been my babies, my toddlers, my children, and were now my peers, my equals, my friends. And I saw something in their faces that I hadn't seen in years. Genuine love, not mixed with obligation or guilt or expectation, but pure, simple love. I want you to know, I said slowly, that even when I was most hurt by your behavior, I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping that someday we'd find our way back to each other. Have we? David asked quietly. Found our way back? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Jessica stood on the porch with her arms full of grocery bags, her face nervous but determined. I brought ingredients for Sunday dinner, she announced as Michael let her in. I thought maybe we could start a new tradition. Every Sunday, our family gathers here and we take turns cooking for each other. Every Sunday? I asked, hardly daring to believe it. Every Sunday, she confirmed, if you'll have us. 20 minutes later, Rebecca arrived with homemade muffins and an apology for never making more effort to include me in their family life. An hour after that, Emma and Jake burst through the front door with school projects to show me and stories about their day that they told with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of children who felt completely comfortable in their grandmother's house. As the day wore on, my house filled with the kind of warmth and noise and love that it hadn't seen since my children were young. We cooked together, ate together, played board games, looked through old photo albums and talked about everything and nothing. At one point, I found myself standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Emma help Jessica make pie crust while Jake pestered David with questions about how to fix things around the house. Sarah was on the floor in the living room, helping Rebecca's youngest daughter build a puzzle, and Michael was in the backyard, showing his son how to throw a baseball the same way Henry had taught him 40 years ago. Mom? Sarah appeared beside me. Are you okay? You look like you're about to cry. I am about to cry, I admitted. But they're happy tears. She put her arm around me. We have a lot of lost time to make up for. Yes, we do. But we have time to do it now. That evening, after everyone had gone home with promises to return the next Sunday, I sat in my quiet house, thinking about the day's events. The transformation in my children wasn't complete. Rebuilding relationships never happens overnight. But it was real, and it was a beginning. I thought about Henry and his careful planning, his love that had reached beyond death to teach our children the lessons they needed to learn. He would be so proud of them today, so happy to see them remembering who they really were underneath all the busyness and selfishness that had accumulated over the years. The next morning, I called my lawyer and made another change to my will. The foundation would still receive a substantial portion of my estate. That work was too important to abandon. But my children would also inherit something significant, both financially and emotionally. More importantly, I set up what I called family funds, accounts specifically designated to help with grandchildren's education, family emergencies, and shared experiences like vacations and celebrations. Money that could only be accessed when the family was working together, when they were supporting each other instead of competing with each other. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call that tested whether my children's transformation was real or just temporary enthusiasm. I had fallen in my garden while trying to plant spring bulbs, and while I wasn't seriously injured, I had sprained my ankle badly enough that I needed help getting around for a few days. The old Dorothy would have called a neighbor or simply managed on her own rather than bothering her children with such a minor problem. But I remembered David's words about calling them first, so I called Michael. Within an hour, all 3 of my children were at my house. Sarah had left work early to take me to the doctor. David had rearranged his schedule to install safety railings in my bathroom and shower. Michael had called in sick to stay with me overnight, just in case I needed anything. This is too much fuss for a sprained ankle, I protested, but I was secretly thrilled by their response. Mom, Sarah said firmly, when we were kids and one of us got hurt, you didn't hesitate to drop everything and take care of us. Now it's our turn. Jessica arrived that evening with homemade soup and announced that she and the kids would be staying in my guest room for the weekend, so I wouldn't be alone. "You don't need to do that," I said, but she just smiled. "Yes, I do, because that's what family does for each other." As I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of my family moving around my house, taking care of me the way I had once taken care of them, I realized that Henry's plan had worked better than either of us could have imagined. My children hadn't just learned to treat me with more kindness and respect. They had learned to be a family again, beschämt, not just to me but to each other. They had remembered that love isn't something you ration out when it's convenient, but something you give freely, because that's what makes life meaningful. 6 months later, we held the first annual Morrison Family Foundation fundraiser in my backyard. My children had insisted on organizing it, turning it into a celebration of community and family that raised more money than I had ever imagined possible. As I watched Emma and Jake playing with children from the families we were helping, as I saw my 3 adult children working together to serve food and organize games, as I witnessed Jessica and Rebecca planning next year's event with the enthusiasm of people who had found their purpose, I thought about legacy. Henry and I had always assumed that our legacy would be our children, the values we taught them, the love we gave them, the people we helped them become. But we had learned that legacy isn't something you pass down automatically. It's something that has to be chosen, embraced, and lived out intentionally. My children had chosen to embrace the legacy of love and service and family loyalty that Henry and I had tried to model for them. And in doing so, they were creating their own legacy for their children, a legacy of forgiveness, of second chances, of families that fight for each other instead of giving up on each other. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, Sarah knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, I wanted to ask you something." "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you think Dad would be proud of us? Of how we've changed? Of how we're treating each other now?" I smiled, thinking of Henry and his wise, loving heart. "I think he'd be incredibly proud, not just of how you've changed, but of how brave you were to admit that change was needed." "I miss him," she said quietly. "I miss him too. But I think he's still here with us in a way, don't you? In the lessons he taught us, in the love he gave us, in the family he helped us become." Sarah hugged me goodnight, and as I turned off the lights, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. My children were truly my children again. My family was whole, and the love that Henry and I had planted in their hearts so many years ago was finally growing into the kind of family we had always dreamed they would become. The foundation continued to grow, helping dozens of families in crisis and creating a legacy of service that would outlast my lifetime. But more importantly, my own family had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that love multiplied when shared, that forgiveness healed not just relationships, but souls, and that it's never too late to choose to become the people we were meant to be. As I drifted off to sleep in the house where I had raised my children, surrounded by the sounds of a family that had found its way back to love, I whispered a quiet thank you to Henry for his wisdom, his planning, and his faith that our children would ultimately choose love over selfishness. Sometimes, the most important inheritance we can leave isn't money or property, but the knowledge that we are loved unconditionally and that we have the power to love others in the same way. Sometimes, the most valuable lessons are the hardest ones to learn, and sometimes, when all seems lost, love finds a way to heal what seemed broken beyond repair. And my children had learned that family isn't just about sharing DNA or holiday obligations. It's about choosing every single day to show up for each other with open hearts and generous spirits. It's about forgiveness, second chances, and the courage to admit when we've lost our way. And as the months passed, and our new traditions took root, as Sunday dinners became sacred and weekly phone calls became natural, and grandchildren learned that their grandmother's house was a place of safety and joy and unconditional love, I knew that Henry's greatest gift to our family wasn't the money he had left behind. It was the reminder that love is the only inheritance that truly matters, and the only legacy that can transform not just individuals, but entire generations. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.